Why did Japan attack Pearl Harbor? Well, most Americans know about the Day of Infamy. Many are unaware of the events that led up to it. Japan was trying to set up an empire throughout Asia, but its violence pushed America to intervene, forcing the empire to take action against the US. First, how and why did Japan make an empire across Southeast Asia, competing with America? Secondly, as the Japanese Empire grew more and more brutal and cruel, America distances itself from it. And third, Japan believed they needed to push the US Navy out of the Pacific. First, well, before I get into this, we need to know about the overview and background. So, I'll give a brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about. Japan had resisted external influence and shunned foreigners. They adopted Western technology. Their wealth led to a powerful empire. They struggled to maintain this, though, and became increasingly brutal. Many nations cut off their ties because of this. A bit of background on this empire as it grew. In 1868, new leaders tried to improve the country's status. Because they wanted to keep their independence. Japan forced Korea to give Japan colonial privileges in Korea. They then took over nearby islands for power. They attacked Korea again, resulting in a victory, and they also took nearby land. Britain wanted tea, but not to pay China, so they smuggled opium in to pay for the tea, which weakens China. During the Russo-Japanese War, Japan shows the power they now have when they take out the Russian fleet. So first, Japan grew their empire, putting them on a collision course with America. There were practical reasons to grow. They wanted to secure their borders, for one. It was a world of empires, and they don't want to get left behind and taken over. There were also business reasons, and they needed access to raw materials. It also caused a return to tradition, and as an emperor became the embodiment of the idea of Japan, they inspired national loyalty. One example was the death and funeral of Emperor Meiji. The emperor died in 1912, and many felt they received a great loss. A general suicide to follow their lord in death. They drew back to old traditions. Quote, on September 13th, 1912, the day of Emperor Meiji's funeral, General Nogi Marisuke committed ritual suicide by seppuku. It was an act of delayed atonement that paid a debt of honor incurred 15 years earlier, unquote, according to Dr. Doris Bargan. This was many of the traditions which was returned to. One of the many traditions that was returned to. Secondly, the Japanese Empire, as the Japanese Empire became increasingly brutal and cruel, America distanced itself. Obviously, some of the actions taken by Japan at the time would have been culturally acceptable, because they obviously have a different culture than us and had at the time too. But some of the actions they took, no one was ever or will be ever fine with it, or should be at least. Even leading up to World War II, American-Japanese relations were healthy, but they became quite brutal. One horrifying example of this was the Nanking Massacre, which has some details that I'll go into that you might not want to hear. In late 1937, after over 6 weeks the Japanese army brutally murdered hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians in Nanking, China. One contemporary recount of the attack is from Tilman Durden, who said, quote, "The killing of civilians was widespread. Foreigners who traveled widely throughout the city on Wednesday found civilians dead on every street. Some of the victims were aged men, women, and children. Policemen and firemen were special objects of attack," unquote. And it only gets worse from here. One man, Chen Deshu, was one who had a personal experience with the massacre. A soldier came into his own home, stabbed his aunt 6 times in the thighs. His aunt handed over her baby to his grandmother, and he remembered this, even though he was only 6 years old. At the time of this. He also invaded French Indochina, and which led to tariffs on Japan from America. These tariffs on Japan increased tension. Roosevelt felt that war was inevitable at this point. And third, Japan believed there was a need to force the U.S. Navy out of the Pacific, which led to the eventual bombing of Pearl Harbor, which was their way of doing so. After the United States response to this, the Japanese Empire quickly realized their existence hung in the balance of this. They decided to ensure their safety by expanding their territorial holdings. The situation only worsened. Japan, allied with the Axis powers, the U.S. negotiation was almost completely broken down. According to Frank Edie Jr., quote, "Prior to December 7th, it was obvious, it was evident to me," meaning him, "that we were pushing Japan into a corner," unquote. Japan felt the right way to handle this was pushing the U.S. Navy out of the Pacific, but to get to that point, they needed Indonesia, and but also for the oil. When they took over Indonesia, they forced Dutch immigrants there into concentration camps. The conditions were horrific. They were treated terribly. Parents were separated. Young girls were forced to dig graves. The camps were also segregated into women's and children's camps and men's camps. There were countless rules, and there was public abuse of those who didn't follow, which often led to their deaths. One bright spot in these camps was Margaret Driver, who worked hard to help the girls she was imprisoned with. She started a choir, and many felt better when they heard the choir singing. After Japan took Indonesia's oil, they didn't want America to steal it, which was another motivation for them to attack Pearl Harbor. Because Japan believed they needed to push the United States Navy out of the Pacific, along with their competition with America, which was led by not only their competition with America and their brutality and cruelness, which led America to cut ties with them. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, although terrible thing, was not out of the blue, unlike some remember it to be. Although some believe that, like many remember about the bombing of Pearl Harbor and its cause for the United States to go for war, they don't know the events that led up to it, which were many and complex. Thank you.